Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching the Today I Found Out YouTube channel, and in the video today we're looking at what is a MacGuffin in films, and why is it called that? In the last scene of the 1941 film classic The Maltese Falcon, Sam Spade, played by Humphrey Bogart, hands over a murderer, played by Mary Astor, and a black falcon statuette to authorities. When asked what the statuette was exactly, Spade looks off into the distance and rather unsatisfactorily explains, "It's stuff that dreams are made of." The Black Falcon statuette, the so-called Maltese Falcon, is a perfect example of what film connoisseurs call the MacGuffin. Sometimes spelled with an A, sometimes spelled without in the Mac part of the name. This is an important and oddly named plot device that appears in many movies. For the uninitiated, in a nutshell, a MacGuffin is an object, event, or person that the characters in a story value greatly, so much so that nearly the whole plot revolves around it, despite that the thing itself isn't actually terribly important to the actual unfolding story. In the end, it doesn't actually matter what the thing, or MacGuffin, is, it's just there to push the characters and the story forward. As Alfred Hitchcock explained in the book Hitchcock, the main thing I've learned over the years is that the MacGuffin is nothing. I'm convinced of this, but I find it very difficult to prove it to others. My best MacGuffin, and by that I mean emptiest, the most non-existent, and the most absurd, is the one we used in North by Northwest. The picture is about espionage, and the only question that's raised in the story is to find out what the spies are after. Well, during the scene at the Chicago airport, the Central Intelligence man explains the whole situation to Cary Grant, and Grant, referring to the James Mason character, asks, "What does he do?" The counterintelligence man replies, "Let's just say he's an importer and exporter." But what does he sell? "Oh, just government secrets," is the answer. Here you see the MacGuffin has been boiled down to its purest expression, nothing at all. It should be noted here that while Hitchcock, and in more modern times the likes of J.J. Abrams, who frequently uses this "it doesn't matter what it is or what it does, nothing at all" approach to MacGuffins in most of his works, for example Rambaldi and his artifacts in Alias or The Rabbit's Foot in Mission Impossible 3, other directors such as George Lucas go the other way and feel that the MacGuffin should be more defined and something that the audience should care about almost as much as the dueling heroes and villains on screen. While the word MacGuffin comes from relatively modern times, which we'll get into in a moment, the concept of it dates back to some of the earliest masterpieces of the written word. In Homer's Iliad, which was first composed almost 3,000 years ago, the MacGuffin was Helen of Troy and her great beauty. Again, it could have been Helen of Troy's great sweet potato pie that led to the launching of 1,000 ships, as long as the story made it clear why the characters were so intent on having that pie. Perhaps with the characters intrigued over what exactly this then unknown food item of potato was, or maybe if the composer wanted to be more explicit about its importance, stating it was made from a recipe given to her by the gods, with those eating it said to become immortal. Now, this all brings us around to why the MacGuffin is called that. Hitchcock, who is often credited as coining the term, though never claimed such himself, once explained he thought it may have come from a common humorous story, with this particular instance of him telling the story appearing in the February 22nd, 1950 edition of the El Paso Herald-Post. There is a bloke on a train. He sees a package and asks what it is. Man says it's a MacGuffin. Other man asks, "What's a MacGuffin?" Other cove says a MacGuffin is an apparatus for trapping lions in the Adirondacks. But there are no lions in the Adirondacks, other bloke says. Then this thing is no MacGuffin, second lad says. This is a variant of similar stories with a common message, such as this one published in 1884 in Henry Irving's Impressions of America by Joseph Hatton, with the moral of the story being the age-old quip, "Ask me no questions and I'll tell you no lies." "Excuse me, sir, but would you mind telling me what is in that extraordinary bundle?" "Certainly, a mongoose," replied the man. "Ah, indeed," ejaculated the broker with unslacked curiosity. "But what is a mongoose, pray?" "Something to kill snakes with." "But why do you wish to kill a snake with a mongoose?" asked the broker. "My brother has the delirium tremens and sees snakes all the time. I'm going to fix him." "But, my dear sir, the snakes with which your brother sees in his delirium are not real snakes, but the figments of his diseased imagination. Not real snakes, sir." "Well, this is not a real mongoose." As for who actually coined the term MacGuffin, writer Angus MacPhail is often given credit here. For instance, filmmaker Ivor Montagu worked with Hitchcock and MacPhail around the time the term first started popping up. He claimed in an article he wrote in 1980 on what it was like to work with Hitchcock, "Sometimes the scenario editor, Angus MacPhail, my old schoolmate, would be there. It was Angus who established the term MacGuffin for the unknown plot objective which you do not need to choose until the story planning was complete." This convenient word Hitch gleefully adopted and used to the end of his career. MacPhail was a studio writer, meaning he was hired to fix scripts and most of the time did not get the credit he deserved for the task. However, he became widely trusted by Hitchcock because he specialized in scenario editing and was often hired to help on the director's films, such as one of Hitchcock's early greats, The 39 Steps, where it is generally claimed MacPhail first came up with the term. In the 1967 book, Hitchcock by Francois Truffaut, Hitchcock explains the interesting evolution of that particular MacGuffin and particularly how it inspired them to go from something important to nothing at all. This became a brilliant hallmark of his MacGuffins. In the 39 Steps, what are the spies after? The man with the missing finger? And that woman at the beginning, was she on to some big secret? Is it because she was getting close to the truth that it became necessary to stab her in the back? In the early stages of the construction, we felt, and we were all wrong, that since life and death were involved, the pretext had to be a very important one. In our first draft, when Robert Donat arrives in Scotland, he picks up some additional information on his way to the spy's house, possibly by following the spy. He rides to the top of the hill, and looking down, he sees underground plane hangars carved into the side of the mountain. Secret hangars, which made the plane safe from bombings. Our original idea was that this MacGuffin should be something big and pictorially striking. Then we went on to work it out in our minds. What does Donat do upon discovering these secret hangars? Will he send off a message to report their locations? And in that case, what counter-steps could the spies take? One option was to blow it up, but how are we going to have them blow up a whole mountain? Anyway, whenever we found ourselves getting terribly involved in this way, we would drop the idea for something very simple. Now, if MacPhail did indeed coin the term, it's unclear today how he came up with it. According to some sources, MacPhail himself used to say he borrowed it from the aforementioned story of the two men on the train, but we could not track down any such instance of MacPhail ever stating anything of the sort, and none of the sources who claim this back up the claim with any primary text. Some have also speculated that it alludes to the word guff, which is defined as meaning nonsense. This word also once meant a stupid or clumsy person. So perhaps MacPhail took the first part of his last name and put the word guff behind it, creating a whole new term that was named loosely after him. It should be noted that in 1926, almost a decade before the 39 Steps, one Robert Haven Schaffler states in his journal, The Writer, that MacGuffin is a word for a gift that is not opened until Christmas. However, this is the only known time the word or name was applied as such, and it's unclear whether there is any connection here or not. In any case, it was Hitchcock who ultimately popularized the word, using it as a plot device in many of his movies. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already for brand new videos just like this every day of the week. Also, over there on the right, a couple of other videos that you might enjoy if you enjoyed this one. And if you've got a why question like this that you would like us to answer, do put it in the comments below. And if you see one you like, upvote it, because the ones that rise to the top, we're more likely to make. So be sure to do that if you've got a burning question for us. And thank you for watching.